4 years ago, my own father looked me in the eye and said, "You're not my son anymore." I was homeless, broke, and battling an addiction that had cost me everything. Last Tuesday, that same man showed up at my office asking for a $200,000 loan to save the family business. When I was 25, I lost everything. My job as a software engineer, my apartment, my savings, my dignity. I had developed a gambling addiction that spiraled so far out of control that I was sleeping in my car and stealing food just to survive. The day I finally worked up the courage to ask my family for help was the day they completely abandoned me. "Figure it out yourself," my dad said, closing the door in my face. "Maybe hitting rock bottom will teach you some responsibility." My mom wouldn't even look at me. My younger brother told his friends I was dead rather than admit he had an addict for a brother. They cut me off completely, changed their phone numbers, blocked me on social media, told extended family I had moved away for work. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. Today, I'm the CEO of a fintech company worth $50 million. I drive a Tesla, own a penthouse downtown, and speak at conferences about overcoming addiction and building wealth. Forbes called me the comeback kid of Silicon Valley. TechCrunch featured my story on their front page, and now, suddenly, I'm their beloved son again. The same people who wouldn't give me $1 for food are asking me for enough money to buy a house. They want back in my life now that there's something in it for them. This is the story of how I went from sleeping in parking lots to sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets, and why I'm about to make the hardest decision of my life. To understand how everything fell apart, you need to know who I was before the addiction took over. My name is Marcus, and 4 years ago I was living what most people would consider the American dream. I was 25, working as a senior software engineer at a tech startup in Austin. Good salary, stock options, the whole package. I had my own apartment in a trendy neighborhood, drove a decent car, and was even putting money away for retirement like a responsible adult. My family was proud of me. I was the success story, the one who made it. Growing up, I was always the golden child. Straight A's in school, full scholarship to UT for computer science, graduated summa cum laude. My parents, Robert and Linda, would brag about me to anyone who would listen. "Our Marcus is going to change the world," my mom would say at family gatherings. My dad, who owned a small construction company, would beam with pride whenever he introduced me as my son, the engineer. My younger brother Jake was different. He struggled in school, barely graduated high school, bounced between jobs, not because he wasn't smart, but because he just couldn't find his direction. My parents worried about him constantly, but they never worried about me. I was the stable one, the reliable one, the one who had everything figured out. That's probably why what happened next was so devastating for them. It started innocently enough. Some coworkers invited me to a poker night. Just a friendly game, $20 buy-in, nothing serious. I'd never really gambled before. Maybe bought a lottery ticket here and there, but that night something clicked. The rush of winning, the strategy, the psychological aspect of reading other players. I was hooked immediately. At first, it was just poker nights. Then I discovered online poker, then sports betting, then casino games. Within 6 months, what started as harmless fun had become a full-blown addiction that was consuming every aspect of my life. I was good at hiding it initially. I kept showing up to work, kept paying my bills, kept up appearances. But gambling addiction is insidious. It doesn't just take your money, it rewires your brain. Every win convinced me I was on the verge of the big score that would solve all my problems. Every loss convinced me I just needed one more bet to get even. The lies started small. "Sorry, I can't make dinner, I have to work late." "My car's in the shop, can you pick me up?" "I'm investing in some high-risk, high-reward stocks." My family bought every excuse because they trusted me. Why wouldn't they? I'd never given them a reason not to. By the time I realized I had a problem, I was already in too deep. I'd blown through my savings, maxed out my credit cards, and taken cash advances I couldn't afford. I was betting my entire paycheck on football games, convinced I could predict the outcomes. When I lost, I'd bet double the next week to try to get even. The breaking point came on a Sunday in October. I'd bet everything I had, left on a sure thing, a game where the spread seemed too good to be true. It was too good to be true. I lost $15,000 in 3 hours. Money I didn't have. Money I'd borrowed against my 401k. Money that was supposed to cover my rent and car payment. That's when the panic set in. Real, crushing panic. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at my laptop screen, refreshing my bank account over and over, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. I was broke. Worse than broke, I was $80,000 in debt with no way to pay it back. I tried to quit cold turkey. Deleted all the apps, blocked the websites, avoided my gambling buddies, but the damage was done. The debt collectors started calling. My landlord served me an eviction notice. My car got repossessed. And still, I couldn't stop. The stress of losing everything just made me want to gamble more, convinced that one big win could fix everything. My work performance suffered. I was distracted, anxious, constantly checking my phone for betting odds instead of writing code. My manager noticed, started asking questions. I managed to hold it together for a few more weeks, but eventually I made a mistake that cost the company a major client. They had to let me go. That's when my carefully constructed life completely collapsed. Without a job, I couldn't make even the minimum payments on my debts. I lost my apartment, had to sell everything I owned just to eat. My family still didn't know what was really happening. I kept making excuses, kept lying, kept pretending everything was fine, but you can only pretend for so long. Eventually, reality catches up with you. And when it did, I learned exactly what my family really thought of me. The day I finally broke down and told them the truth was the day I lost everything that mattered. Not just my money or my apartment or my job, I lost my family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally showed me just how conditional their love really was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about that conversation because it's burned into my memory like a brand. Every word, every expression, every moment of rejection. It's the moment that changed everything. The conversation that destroyed my family happened on a cold Tuesday in November. I'd been sleeping in my car for 3 days, showering at the gym until my membership got canceled for non-payment. I was down to my last $20 and hadn't eaten a real meal in 48 hours. I remember sitting in that car, parked outside a McDonald's, trying to work up the courage to call my parents. My phone was about to get shut off, my stomach was cramping from hunger, and I could see my breath in the cold air. I kept telling myself they'd understand, they'd help. They were my family. I was wrong. My dad answered on the second ring. "Marcus, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for weeks." His voice sounded concerned, maybe even relieved. For a moment, I thought everything might be okay. "Dad, I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm in trouble. Real trouble." There was a pause. "What kind of trouble?" That's when I broke down. Everything came pouring out. The gambling, the debt, losing my job, losing my apartment. I told him about the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the way I couldn't stop, even when I knew I was destroying my life. I cried on that phone like I hadn't cried since I was a kid. And when I finished, there was silence. Long, heavy silence. "How much?" he finally asked. "How much what? How much do you owe?" I took a shaky breath. "About 80,000. Another silence. And then I heard him talking to my mom in the background, his hand partially covering the phone. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught gambling and 80,000 and what sounded like my mom gasping. "Marcus," he said when he came back to the phone, "come home. We need to talk about this in person." I felt a surge of relief. They were going to help. Of course they were going to help. This was my family. I drove to their house in my beat-up Honda, the one with the cracked windshield and the heater that barely worked. The same house where I'd grown up, where I'd celebrated every birthday and Christmas, where my high school graduation photos still hung on the wall. My mom answered the door. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She hugged me, but it felt different, stiff, like she was hugging a stranger. "You look terrible," she said, which was probably true. I hadn't shaved in a week. My clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, and I'd lost about 20 pounds from the stress and irregular eating. My dad was waiting in the living room, sitting in his usual chair. Jake was there too, which surprised me. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be part of whatever was about to happen. "Sit down," my dad said, gesturing to the couch across from him. It felt like a job interview, not a family meeting. For the next hour, they interrogated me. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I tell them sooner? How could I be so irresponsible? Did I steal money from anyone? Was I on drugs too? I answered every question, honestly. Told them about the progression from poker nights to online gambling to sports betting. Explained how I'd tried to quit multiple times but couldn't. Described the shame and isolation I'd been living with for months. My mom cried through most of it. Jake just sat there, staring at his hands. My dad's expression got harder with every detail. When I finished explaining everything, I finally asked the question I'd been building up to. "I need help. I can't do this alone anymore." "Well, what kind of help?" my dad asked. "I need somewhere to stay while I get back on my feet. Maybe help with rehab or therapy or just, I don't know, support. I need my family." That's when everything changed. My dad leaned back in his chair and looked at me like I was a stranger who'd just asked him for money on the street. "Marcus, you're 25 years old. You have a college degree, you had a good job, a good life, and you threw it all away?" "I know, but..." "No," he cut me off. "You made these choices. You lied to us for months. You destroyed your own life, and now you want us to fix it for you." My mom was nodding along, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "We raised you better than this, Marcus. We gave you every opportunity, every advantage, and this is what you do with it?" I felt like I was drowning. "I have an addiction. It's a disease. I need treatment." Jake finally spoke up. "Addiction is just an excuse for weak people who can't take responsibility for their actions." He wouldn't even look at me when he said it. My dad stood up. We're not going to enable this behavior. You want help? Help yourself, get a job, pay your debts. Prove that you can be a responsible adult. I'm trying, I said, my voice breaking. But I can't do it alone. You need to grow up, my mom interrupted. We're not going to give you money to gamble away. We're not going to let you move back in here and bring this chaos into our home. The room went quiet, except for the sound of my mom's sniffling. I looked around at these three people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I saw nothing but disappointment and disgust. So that's it? I asked. You're just going to abandon me? My dad's voice was cold when he answered. You abandoned yourself first. You abandoned this family when you chose gambling over everything else. We didn't do this to you, Marcus. You did this to yourself. But tudu kamasoa mudark, when my dad said the words that would haunt me for the next 4 years. Until you prove you can change, until you show us you're the son we raised and not this. The stranger sitting in our living room, you're not welcome here. The drive away from my parents' house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept expecting my phone to ring, expecting one of them to call me back, to say they'd made a mistake, that they wanted to help after all. The phone never rang. I parked at a 24-hour diner and sat there until sunrise, replaying every word of that conversation. The way my dad's voice had turned cold and distant. The way my mom had looked at me like I was a stranger. The way Jake had called addiction an excuse for weak people. That's when the real spiral began. Instead of using their rejection as motivation to get clean, I did the opposite. I felt so hopeless, so abandoned, that I convinced myself nothing mattered anymore. If my own family had given up on me, why shouldn't I give up on myself? I took my last $20 and bought a lottery ticket. Lost, obviously. Then I borrowed $50 from a guy at the diner, promising to pay him back double the next day. Used that to bet on a basketball game. Lost again. Within a week, I was borrowing money from loan sharks, dangerous people who didn't care about my sob story or my family situation. They just wanted their money back, with interest, on time. The first few weeks of homelessness were a blur of desperation and bad decisions. I slept in my car until it got repossessed for missed payments. Then I slept in parks, under bridges, in 24-hour laundromats. I showered in public restrooms when I could, ate from dumpsters when I had to. But the gambling didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. I'd panhandle for change, then immediately blow it on scratch-off tickets. I'd find day labor jobs, work for 8 hours in the Texas heat, then bet my entire paycheck on a football game that night. The loan sharks started getting impatient. First came the threatening phone calls. Then they started showing up places where I was staying. One night, 2 guys cornered me behind a gas station and made it very clear what would happen if I didn't start paying them back. That's when I tried to reach out to my family again. I called my mom from a payphone outside a hospital, my face still bruised from the conversation with the loan sharks. I was crying before she even answered. Mom, please, I'm in real danger. These people are going to hurt me if I don't pay them back. Her voice was tired, defeated. Marcus, we can't keep doing this. Every time we talk to you, it's about money or gambling or some crisis you've created. This is different. I could die. Then maybe it's time you checked yourself into rehab. There are programs for people like you. I tried. I can't get into any programs without insurance or money for a deposit. I need help getting help. There was a long pause. Your father and I have talked about this. We've decided we need to protect ourselves and Jake from the situation. We're changing our phone numbers. I felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. What? We love you, Marcus, but we can't watch you destroy yourself anymore, and we can't let you destroy us too. Mom, please. The line went dead. I called back immediately. The number was already disconnected. That night, I seriously considered ending it all. I stood on a bridge downtown, looking down at the water, thinking about how much easier it would be to just disappear. The only thing that stopped me was pure stubbornness. I was angry at my family for abandoning me, angry at myself for getting into this mess, angry at the world for being so unfair. But anger, it turned out, was better fuel than despair. The next morning, I made a decision. If my family wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. I'd show them what I was capable of without them. I started small. Found a job washing dishes at a 24-hour diner for cash under the table. The manager, Carlos, was an ex-addict himself. He could spot the desperation in my eyes from across the room. You gambling? He asked me on my first day. I nodded, too tired to lie anymore. You want to stop? I don't know how. First step is admitting you got a problem. Second step is deciding you want to live more than you want to gamble. You there yet? I thought about it. About the bridge, about the loan sharks, about my family's rejection. Yeah, I think I am. Carlos became the first person in months to show me any kindness. He let me pick up extra shifts, paid me daily so I wouldn't be tempted to blow a whole week's pay at once, and most importantly, he listened without judgment. But even with steady work, I was barely surviving. The loan sharks were still circling. My debt was growing with interest, and I was living in a homeless shelter that kicked everyone out at 6 a.m. every morning. 3 months into my dishwashing career, I had what Carlos called a moment of clarity. I was walking past a casino on my way to work, and for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel the urge to go inside. I just walked past, like it was any other building. That's when I knew I was ready to really try to get clean. I found a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in a church basement, walked in expecting to find a room full of degenerates, and found instead a group of people who understood exactly what I'd been through. Lawyers, teachers, retirees, students. Addiction doesn't discriminate. The first time I spoke in that room, I told them about my family, about how they'd cut me off, changed their numbers, essentially erased me from their lives. An older man named Frank spoke up after I finished. Let me ask you something, son. If your brother came to you right now, told you he was a gambling addict and needed $80,000, what would you do? I thought about it honestly. I'd probably think he was trying to scam me. Exactly. Your family's not evil. They're protecting themselves the only way they know how. Can't blame them for that. Frank became my sponsor. He'd been clean for 12 years, had lost 2 marriages and a business to gambling before getting his life together. He taught me that recovery wasn't just about stopping gambling. It was about rebuilding everything the addiction had destroyed. Your family will come around, he told me one day, but not until you prove you've really changed. And that takes time, years, not months. I started working the 12 steps, made a list of everyone I'd hurt, everyone I'd lied to, everyone I owed money to. The list was longer than I expected. 6 months clean, I got promoted to prep cook. A year clean, I was managing the night shift. I was still living in a tiny studio apartment and riding the bus to work, but I was building something, slowly, carefully, one day at a time. But the hardest part wasn't staying clean or working my way up from rock bottom. The hardest part was the silence from my family. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, no acknowledgement that I even existed. I'd drive past their house sometimes, just to see if anything had changed. The same cars in the driveway, the same lights in the windows, the same life continuing without me. 2 years clean, I tried reaching out one more time. I sent a letter to their old address, hoping it would get forwarded. I told them about my recovery, about my job, about how I was slowly paying back my debts. I included my new phone number and address. I never heard back. That's when I realized something that would change everything. I was done waiting for their approval. I was done trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. I was going to succeed, not to win them back, but to prove to myself that I was worth more than they thought I was. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in March, exactly 3 years after my family had cut me off. I was working the closing shift at the diner, wiping down tables and thinking about how I was going to pay for the coding boot camp I'd been saving for, when Carlos called me over to the register. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you." I looked up and froze. Standing by the front door was Jake, my younger brother. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive, but his eyes had dark circles under them. For a moment, neither of us moved. 3 years of silence stretched between us like a canyon. "Can we talk?" he finally asked. I glanced at Carlos, who nodded. "Take your break, man. I'll finish up here." Jake and I sat in a corner booth, the same kind of booth where I'd spent countless nights during my worst days, nursing a single cup of coffee and trying to figure out how to survive another day. "You look good," Jake said, which was probably true. 3 years of sobriety, regular meals, and honest work had put some weight back on me. I wasn't the skeletal, desperate person who'd begged for help in their living room. "What do you want, Jake?" I asked. I wasn't trying to be cold, but I'd learned to protect myself from hope. He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about you a lot, especially lately." Funny way of showing it. I know we screwed up. I screwed up." He looked up at me, and I could see something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. "I've been wanting to reach out for months, but I didn't know how. You could have started with a phone call. Would you have answered?" I thought about it honestly. "Probably not." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Jake started talking, and what he told me explained so much about the last 3 years. "Things haven't been good at home, Marcus. Really not good. Dad's business has been struggling since the recession. He's had to lay off most of his crew, and the contracts just aren't coming in like they used to." I listened without interrupting, watching my brother's face as he talked. "Mom's been working double shifts at the hospital to help make ends meet. They're behind on the mortgage. Way behind. The bank sent a foreclosure notice last month." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my parents to lose their home. "But that's not the worst part," Jake continued. "The worst part is what it's done to them, to us. Dad's been drinking more. Mom cries all the time. And me?" He paused, looking down at his hands. "I've been gambling." My blood went cold. "What?" "Started about a year ago. Just sports betting at first, then online poker, then..." He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. I'd walked that exact same path. "How bad?" I asked. "Bad. Really bad. I'm about 30,000 in the hole, and it's getting worse. I felt like I was looking at myself 4 years ago. The same shame, the same desperation, the same inability to stop, even when you know you're destroying everything. Does the family know? Jake shook his head. They can't know, not with everything else they're dealing with. It would kill them. Jake, you need help. Real help. There are programs. I know, he interrupted. I've been to a few GA meetings. That's actually how I found out where you worked. Someone there mentioned seeing you at meetings a few years back. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother had discovered my recovery through his own addiction. I'm trying to get clean, he continued. But it's hard, really hard. And seeing what it's doing to Mom and Dad, knowing I'm making everything worse, his voice broke. I don't know how you survived it. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than anger toward my family. I felt compassion, because I knew exactly what Jake was going through. The shame, the isolation, the feeling that you're destroying everything you touch. You survive it one day at a time, I told him. Sometimes 1 hour at a time. We talked for another hour. Jake told me about his job at an accounting firm, about how he'd been stealing from petty cash to cover his gambling debts, about how he was terrified he was going to get caught and lose everything. I told him about my recovery, about the meetings, about Frank, about how I'd slowly rebuilt my life from nothing. I gave him Frank's number and the address of my home group. As he was getting ready to leave, Jake hesitated. There's something else I need to tell you. What? Mom and Dad, they know where you work? They've known for over a year. I felt like he'd slapped me. What do you mean they know? Mom saw you one day when she was driving past. She recognized you through the window. She came home crying, told Dad she'd seen you. And they never... I couldn't finish the sentence. Dad said you'd made your choice. Said if you wanted to be part of the family again, you'd reach out. But Mom's been driving by here at least once a week for the past year. She sits in the parking lot across the street and watches you work. I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak that was almost overwhelming. They'd been watching me, checking on me, but never once tried to make contact. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Jake looked me straight in the eyes. Because I think we're all too proud and too scared to make the first move. And because I realized something sitting in those GA meetings, listening to other people's stories. We didn't just abandon you when you needed help. We abandoned you when you were sick. That conversation with Jake was the catalyst for everything that came next. Not because it made me want to reconcile with my family. I wasn't ready for that yet. But because it made me realize something important. I'd been living my recovery for them, trying to prove I was worthy of their love again. But I needed to start living for myself. The next day, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I'd been saving money for that coding boot camp for months, putting away every spare dollar. But instead of spending it on education, I decided to invest it in something else, myself. I'd been working on an idea during my spare time, sketching out plans for a mobile app that would help people track their spending and identify potential gambling triggers. I'd learned from my own experience how easy it was to lose track of money when you're in the grip of addiction. I took my $3,000 in savings and hired a freelance developer to help me build a basic version of the app. I called it ClearPath, a financial tracking tool specifically designed for people in recovery from gambling addiction. The app was simple but effective. It connected to your bank accounts and credit cards, categorized your spending, and sent alerts when you made purchases that fit patterns associated with gambling behavior. It also included links to GA meetings, crisis hotlines, and recovery resources. I spent every free moment working on it. Nights after my shift, at the diner, weekends, any spare time I had. Frank thought I was obsessing, but I knew this was different. This wasn't the manic energy of gambling addiction. This was purpose. 6 months later, I launched ClearPath in the App Store. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few dozen downloads from people in my GA group. Instead, something incredible happened. The app went viral in the recovery community. People started sharing it on social media, recommending it in meetings, writing reviews about how it had helped them stay clean. Within 3 months, ClearPath had 10,000 active users. Within 6 months, 50,000. Tech blogs started writing about it. Recovery organizations began recommending it to their clients. That's when the investors started calling. A venture capital firm in Austin reached out, said they were interested in funding an expanded version of the app. They offered me $100,000 for a 30% stake in the company, plus resources to hire a full development team. I said yes. Suddenly, I wasn't Marcus the dishwasher anymore. I was Marcus the CEO. I hired 3 developers, a marketing specialist, and moved into a real office space. We expanded ClearPath to include features for other types of addiction: shopping, substance abuse, even social media addiction. The app grew exponentially. Within a year, we had 500,000 users. Within 2 years, we'd raised $2 million in Series A funding. I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of, but more importantly, I was helping people. Every day, I got emails from users telling me how the app had helped them stay clean, how it had saved their marriages, their careers, their lives. 3.5 years after my family had abandoned me, I was featured on the cover of Austin Business Journal as Entrepreneur of the Year. The article talked about my journey from addiction to recovery to success. It mentioned my family briefly, noting that I'd overcome my struggles without traditional family support. That article changed everything. Because apparently, my family had been watching my success just as closely as they'd watched my failure. The morning after the article came out, I walked into my office to find my assistant looking flustered. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "there are some people here to see you. They say they're your family." I stood in the doorway of my office conference room, looking at 3 people I hadn't seen in almost 4 years. My parents sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, Jake on the other. They all looked up when I entered, and for a moment nobody spoke. My dad had aged significantly. His hair was completely gray now, and he looked thinner, more fragile than I remembered. My mom's hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her purse. Jake just looked relieved that I had agreed to see them. "Hello, Marcus," my mom said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I sat down across from them, my hands folded on the table. "What do you want?" My dad cleared his throat. "We saw the article. We're proud of what you've accomplished." "Are you?" I asked. "Because 4 years ago, you told me I wasn't your son anymore." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. My mom started crying immediately, quiet tears that she tried to wipe away with a tissue. "We made mistakes," my dad continued. "We were scared, and we didn't know how to help you. We thought tough love was the answer." "Tough love?" I felt my voice rising. "You abandoned me. You changed your phone numbers. You pretended I didn't exist." "We were protecting ourselves," Jake said quietly. "And protecting you, in a way. We thought if we enabled you, we'd just be making things worse." I looked at my brother, remembering our conversation at the diner months earlier. "How's your recovery going, Jake?" He looked surprised that I'd brought it up in front of our parents. "Good. Really good. I've been clean for 8 months now. Frank's been helping me." My parents looked confused. "Recovery?" my mom asked. Jake glanced at me, then back at them. "I had a gambling problem, too. Marcus helped me get into GA." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my parents process this information, saw the same look of shock and disappointment cross their faces that I'd seen 4 years earlier. But then something different happened. Instead of anger or rejection, my mom reached over and took Jake's hand. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Because I was afraid you'd react the same way you did with Marcus," Jake said. My dad looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. We would have helped you." "Would you?" I asked. "Because when I needed help, you threw me out." My mom turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, we were wrong. So wrong. We've regretted it every single day for 4 years. Have you?" I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the Austin skyline. "Because Jake told me you've been watching me, driving by my work, checking up on me, but you never once tried to reach out. We didn't think you'd want to see us," my dad said. I turned back to face them. "So you waited until I was successful? Until I had money and a company and my picture in the paper? That's not why we're here," my mom said quickly. "Isn't it?" I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot. "I got this email from Dad yesterday." I read it aloud. "Marcus, we've been following your success and we're so proud. We'd love to reconnect and maybe discuss some business opportunities. The family construction company has been struggling, and we think your expertise and resources could help us turn things around." My dad's face turned red. "That's not... I mean, yes, we need help, but that's not the only reason." "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. "Just stop lying. You're here because you need money. You're here because your business is failing and you think I can save it. You're here because I'm useful to you now." And my mom was sobbing openly now. "Marcus, please, we love you. We've always loved you." "No," I said firmly. "You love the idea of me, the successful son, the engineer, the one who made you look good. But the moment I became inconvenient, the moment I needed help instead of providing it, you threw me away." I sat back down and looked at each of them. Do you want to know what the worst part was? It wasn't the homelessness or the hunger or even the loan sharks threatening to break my legs. It was lying awake at night wondering what I'd done to make my own family stop loving me. "We never stopped loving you," Jake said. "You have a funny way of showing love," I replied. "Changing your phone numbers, refusing to answer my letters, pretending I was dead rather than admitting I had a problem." My dad finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "What do you want us to say, Marcus? We screwed up. We were scared and selfish, and we handled everything wrong. But we're here now." "You're here now because you need something from me," I corrected. "Not because you missed me or worried about me or wanted to make amends. You're here because I'm successful now, and you think that success can solve your problems." I stood up again. "Well, here's the thing. My success isn't for sale, and it's definitely not for people who abandoned me when I needed them most." My mom looked up at me with desperate eyes. "What can we do? How can we make this right?" I thought about that question for a long moment. I don't know if you can, I said finally. 4 years ago, I would have done anything to hear you say you were proud of me. I would have given anything to have you in my life. But I'm not that desperate, broken person anymore. We know, my dad said quietly. We can see that. You've become an incredible man, and we had nothing to do with it. That's right, I agreed. I became who I am despite you, not because of you. I built this company, this life, this success without any help from the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. I walked toward the door, then stopped. I'll think about whether I want you in my life. But understand this, if I decide to give you another chance, it won't be because we're family. It'll be because you've earned it. And right now, you haven't. As I reached for the door handle, my mom called out one last time. Marcus, wait. There's something else you need to know. I turned back, and what she told me next would change everything again. What my mom told me in that conference room stopped me cold. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, her hands trembling as she set it on the table. We kept everything, she said quietly. Every article about your company, every interview, every mention of your name online. We have newspaper clippings, printed screenshots, even recordings of podcast interviews you did. She opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table. There were dozens of articles, photos, printouts. 4 years of my life documented by people who had supposedly erased me from theirs. We were wrong to cut you off, my dad said, his voice breaking. But we never stopped caring about what happened to you. We never stopped being proud of you. I stared at the collection of papers, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite process. Anger, confusion, and something that might have been relief. If you cared so much, I said slowly, why didn't you reach out when I was featured in TechCrunch last year? Or when I spoke at that recovery conference? Why wait until now? My mom looked down at her hands. Because we were ashamed. We knew we'd failed you when you needed us most, and we didn't know how to face that. So, you waited until you needed something from me. Yes, my dad admitted, and that makes us cowards. But Marcus, seeing what you've built, knowing that you did it without us, it made us realize how badly we screwed up. I sat back down, looking at the evidence of their secret attention to my life. There was something both touching and disturbing about it. They'd been watching me succeed, while I'd been convinced they didn't care if I lived or died. You want to know what I learned during those 4 years? I asked them. I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. I thought about Carlos, who'd given me a job when no one else would. About Frank, who'd sponsored me through recovery without asking for anything in return. About the strangers in GA meetings who'd listened to my story without judgment. I learned that the people who matter are the ones who see you at your worst and still believe you can be better. The people who don't abandon you when you're inconvenient or embarrassing or difficult to love. My mom was crying again, but I continued. I learned that I don't need anyone's approval to be worthy of love and respect. For years, I thought I had to prove myself to you, had to earn my way back into this family. But the truth is, you needed to prove yourselves to me. Jake spoke up. Have we? Proven ourselves? I looked at my brother, the only one who'd reached out during my recovery, even if it was because of his own struggles. You have, Jake. At least you tried. You came to find me when you needed help, but you also listened when I needed to talk. That's more than they did. I turned back to my parents. But you two? You've shown me exactly who you are. You're people who love conditionally, who support their children only when it's convenient or beneficial, who abandon family members when they become problems instead of solutions. My dad's shoulders slumped. So there's no chance for us? No way to make this right? I thought about that question for a long time. The old Marcus, the one who'd been desperate for their approval, would have forgiven them immediately just to have his family back. But I wasn't that person anymore. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe, but it would take time. Years, probably. And it would require you to actually change, not just apologize. What would that look like? My mom asked. It would mean accepting responsibility for your actions without making excuses. It would mean understanding that you don't get to waltz back into my life just because I'm successful now. It would mean proving that you can love me even when I'm not useful to you. I stood up again, feeling emotionally drained. Most importantly, it would mean accepting that I don't owe you anything. Not money, not forgiveness, not a relationship. If we rebuild something, it has to be because we both want it, not because you need it. Looking back now, I realize that conversation was the moment I truly became free. Not free from addiction. I'd achieved that years earlier. Free from the need for their validation. Free from the belief that I was somehow incomplete without their love. The biggest lesson I learned, I told them as I walked toward the door, is that you can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how much power you give them over your happiness. For 4 years, I let your rejection define my worth. Never again. I paused at the door one last time. If you want to be part of my life, you'll need to earn that privilege, and you'll need to do it without expecting anything in return. Because the son who desperately needed your approval, he's gone. And the man who replaced him doesn't need anyone who doesn't choose to be here. That was the moment I realized I'd already won. Not because I was successful or wealthy or featured in magazines, but because I'd learned to value myself enough to set boundaries. Because I'd discovered that the most important relationship I'd ever have was the one with myself. That was 6 months ago. 6 months since my family walked back into my life asking for help they didn't deserve. 6 months since I had to make the hardest decision of my adult life. I didn't give them the money, not because I couldn't afford it. By then, ClearPath was valued at over $15 million, and I could have easily written a check to save their business. I didn't give it to them because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Enabling someone's bad decisions isn't love, it's weakness. My parents lost their construction company 3 weeks later. They had to sell the house I grew up in and move into a small apartment across town. My dad took a job working for one of his former competitors. My mom picked up extra shifts at the hospital. Jake, on the other hand, kept working his recovery. He's been clean for over a year now, attends meetings regularly, and we talk every few weeks. He never asked me for money, never tried to guilt me into helping our parents. He understood that recovery means taking responsibility for your own choices. The day after my parents lost their business, my mom called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I wanted you to know," she said, her voice steady for the first time in months, "that you were right. We came to you for the wrong reasons, and we got exactly what we deserved." "Mom, no, let me finish. Your father and I have been talking, really talking, for the first time in years. We realize now that we didn't just fail you when you were addicted. We failed you your whole life by making our love conditional on your success." I listened, surprised by the clarity in her voice. "We're going to counseling," she continued, "both of us, together and separately. Not because we think it'll win you back, but because we need to figure out how we became the kind of people who abandon their child when he needs help most." That conversation was different from all the others. No manipulation, no guilt trips, no requests for money or forgiveness, just acknowledgement and accountability. 3 months later, my dad sent me a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter. In it, he told me about the therapy sessions, about the things he was learning about himself, about the mistakes he was finally ready to own. "I spent your whole childhood teaching you that love had to be earned," he wrote. "That you were only valuable when you were achieving something. I turned you into a perfectionist who couldn't handle failure, and then I punished you when you finally failed. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but it's where I have to start." I kept that letter, not because I was ready to forgive him, but because it was the first time he'd taken responsibility without asking for anything in return. Last month, ClearPath was acquired by a major tech company for $50 million. The news made the front page of the Austin Business Journal again, and this time, my family didn't show up at my office. They didn't call, didn't email, didn't try to insert themselves into my success. Instead, I got a simple text from my mom. "Saw the news. Proud of you. No response needed." That restraint, that respect for my boundaries, meant more to me than any apology ever could. Today, I'm 29 years old and 5 years clean. I live in a penthouse downtown, drive a car that costs more than most people's houses, and run a company that helps thousands of people stay in recovery every day. But more importantly, I've learned to measure my worth by my own standards, not by other people's approval. I still go to GA meetings every week, not because I need them to stay clean anymore, but because I want to give back to the community that saved my life when my family wouldn't. I sponsor 3 people now, and I tell each of them the same thing Frank told me. Recovery isn't just about stopping the destructive behavior, it's about rebuilding everything that behavior destroyed. Sometimes people ask me if I'll ever reconcile with my parents. The honest answer is, I don't know. Maybe someday, if they continue doing the work to become better people. But I've learned that I don't need their love to be complete. I don't need their approval to be successful. I don't need their presence to be happy. The family that matters to me now is the one I've chosen. Jake, who's fighting his own battles with courage and honesty. Frank, who taught me that recovery is possible. Carlos, who gave me a chance when no one else would. And the community of people who understand that addiction doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. 4 years ago, my father told me I wasn't his son anymore. He was wrong. I was never his son to begin with. I was my own person, and it just took me hitting rock bottom to figure that out. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't success. It's healing. It's becoming the person you were meant to be, with or without the people who were supposed to help you get there. And that's a victory no one can ever take away from you.